Transgender people have been at the forefront of queer politics from the beginning of queer politics. And in the context of the United States, gender nonconforming and transgender people are among the most vilified and discriminated against in our society. It only makes sense that privileges queer people like me enjoy today would be spearheaded by transgender people. Hi, my name is Donna Lavond. My pronouns are she and they, and a transgender activist that I would like to shine a spotlight on today is Leslie Feinberg. Leslie Feinberg is a white Jewish activist who identified as a transgender butch lesbian, and she is most well known for her work Stone Butch Blues, published in 1993, and Transgender Warriors, published in 1996. It is often misunderstood that Stone Butch Blues is an autobiographical novel, when in fact it is not. It is actually fiction, but it is heavily based off of Leslie Feinberg's own life. Transgender Warriors is kind of like a mix of a theory and a history book. And I would say that the beginning of Transgender Warriors is actually the closest thing to an autobiography that Feinberg has written. I very much look up to Leslie Feinberg, and I'm very, very excited to teach you guys about here today. And so today we will be talking about here life, here philosophy, and here politics and activism. Leslie Feinberg identified as a transgender butch lesbian and used many pronouns depending on the context. For most of her political writing, she is known by she, her, and is known by many people in her life as she, her. However, she and here were her preferred pronouns, and these are the pronouns that are used throughout her personal website. Regarding pronouns, Leslie Feinberg states, "I care which pronoun is used, but people have been respectful to me with the wrong pronoun and disrespectful with the right one. It matters whether someone is using the pronoun as a bigot or if they are trying to demonstrate respect." Taking this into consideration, I will be mainly using ze, her pronouns, but may occasionally end up using she and her, as those are the pronouns that Feinberg used throughout her work and throughout her life. Leslie Feinberg was born on September 1st, 1949, in Kansas City, Missouri, to Jewish working-class parents. The family seemed to have moved around quite a bit, moving to Arizona before eventually settling in Buffalo, New York, which is where Leslie Feinberg was raised. The family lived in the projects of the Bell Aerospace Factory, where her parents worked. Feinberg was raised in the 1950s, a time when gender roles were very strict and very rigid. Not only were gender roles socially reinforced, but people were also arrested for defying gender roles by wearing clothing that was not correct to their assigned gender. People who defied gender norms became a target for harassment and discrimination. This is the world that Feinberg grew up in, and from a very young age, Z felt different from other people. Z had always been a masculine girl, recalling, "My own gender expression felt quite natural. I liked my hair short, and I felt most relaxed in sneakers, jeans, and a t-shirt. However, when I was most at home with how I looked, adults did a double take or stopped short when they saw me. The question, is that a boy or a girl, hounded me throughout my childhood. The answer didn't matter much. The very fact that strangers had to ask the question already marked me as a gender outlaw." Feinberg's gender expression marked them as different. Her use of the word outlaw here is very purposeful, as gender nonconforming people throughout history have been persecuted literally by the law and also treated as social outcasts. Feinberg states, "The laws were not simply about clothing. We were masculine women and feminine men. It was our gender expression that made us targets." Conformity to gender roles became a massive force in Feinberg's life. She grew up in a Jewish family in McCarthy-era United States. Feinberg explains that her family was still reeling from the effects of the 1917 violence against Jewish people in Tsarist Russia, and they also feared fascism, as World War II had barely passed. To them, McCarthyism stank of fascism, and the family feared the attention to Feinberg's differences. In this environment, Feinberg never learned of queer people of any kind, at least not in any positive context. And it wasn't until the transition of World War II veteran Christine Jorgensen that Feinberg knew that there was people like her. Christine Jorgensen was a World War II veteran, known for being the first person in the United States and the second person in the entire world to undergo sex reassignment surgery. While the media was stunned and fascinated by Jorgensen, the broader society did not necessarily share the same views. People in Feinberg's life made derogatory comments and jokes about Jorgensen, but ironically, this signaled to Feinberg that Christine Jorgensen was just like her, a gender outlaw. Jorgensen proved that gender nonconforming people existed. What Feinberg remarks here stood out to me. Jorgensen proved that even a period of right-wing reaction could not coerce each individual into conformity. I felt like this line was really relevant to the political landscape we are experiencing right now in the United States. As Feinberg got older, she began to frequent gay and lesbian bars throughout Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Toronto. During this time, she became exposed to the revolutionary politics of the civil rights movement, and this period would come to have a massive impact on her life and political work. As soon as she could work, she found work in factories alongside other working class people from various backgrounds. Through this work, she began to see the ways in which race and gender were used to pit groups against each other that would have otherwise found solidarity. Still, in this environment, Feinberg experienced harassment for her gender expressions, something that she could not change, and she tried. When the economic boom of the 1960s ended, what followed was a recession. During the 1970s recession, Feinberg lost her job and had to find more employment, but found it hard to get hired as a masculine woman. In an attempt to gain employment, she borrowed a wig and feminine clothing from a femme friend of theirs and tried to pass as a cisgender woman. However, she found that she experienced more harassment because it was assumed that she was a man trying to act as a woman. It was in this moment that she realized that she could not conceal her gender expression. She decided instead to lean into her gender expression, borrowing glue-on sideburns from a drag king friend, and found out that most people didn't think twice about her gender expression. Most people assumed that Z was a cisgender man. And it was at this point that Z decided to live full-time as a man. After much consideration, Feinberg began transitioning hormonally and surgically. And it was during this time of transition, literally and figuratively, that she began being exposed to Marxist politics. At some time in their 20s, Feinberg became involved with the Workers' World Party through a demonstration for Palestinian self-determination and land rights. It was through activism like this that Leslie Feinberg learned a great deal about feminism, anti-racism, Native American sovereignty, prison abolition, and more. The education Z received from her comrades would come to play a massive role in the political work and the books that Leslie Feinberg would publish later in her life. In this section of the video, I want to talk a little bit about the politics that Leslie Feinberg engaged in, but there's only so much that I can fit in a 10-minute-ish span of time, and there's only so much I can do to summarize the incredible life of a 65-year-old person. There's just so much information. So what I want to do is I want to cover what I think were the most important things and the things that I think would help you guys understand what Leslie Feinberg believed and the kinds of things that went into her activism. First, I want to talk about language. Language seemed to serve as the primary basis for a lot of Feinberg's politics. She grew up in a time when labels like transgender and even the word gay hadn't existed, and there was a lot of debate over whether or not there should even be an umbrella term to define the entire queer community. Even my use of the word queer now is very, very new, and it's still not something that every queer person or every LGBTQ person in the world would want to take up for themselves. For most of history, the queer community has had to rely on their own set of language, either creating new words for themselves or redefining words that were already applied to them. Feinberg explains, I asked many self-identified transgender activists who they believed were included under the umbrella term transgender. Those polled named transsexuals, transgenders, transvestites, transgenderists, bigenders, drag queens, cross-dressers, masculine women, feminine men, intersexuals, people referred to in the past as hermaphrodites, androgynes, and trust me, the list goes on. I have to cut it for the sake of time. But I hope that this shows to you that there were so many words, and there continue to be so many words, that queer people use to define themselves. Feinberg herself used a lot of words to define her own identity, from butch lesbian to transgender to masculine woman and beyond. There was a lot of words that were used and applied on Feinberg against her will as well, such as terms he, she, etc. So it makes a lot of sense that Z would have such an emphasis on the use of language in defining the self. In fact, in her book Transgender Warriors, language plays a huge role in the writing of the book itself. Feinberg explains that it is really hard to understand the history of gender nonconforming people because throughout time there have been so many words used for them. And our definition of how these words and how these identities work do not necessarily apply to the past. And so, for example, if there is somebody in the past that we may consider transgender today, that may not be how they would have defined themselves, and the actual actions that that person took to define themselves may not be necessarily what we consider transgender. They may not have done all the same things within our own definition, if that makes any sense. Related to the concept of language, another thing that Feinberg really, really stressed was self determination. As I said, she began getting into politics with a self determination rally for Palestinians. And in fact, the plight of Palestinians was something very, very important to Feinberg. When Stone Butch Blues was translated into Hebrew, she dedicated all of the proceeds directly to the Aswat Palestinian Women's Fund. And as you can see, the ability to define yourself and to live your own life to the freest point that you possibly can was really, really important to Leslie Feinberg. Feinberg would be the first person to tell you that you do not live by the way other people define you. You do not have to follow the very strictest definition of language, and you don't have to follow the very strictest definition of an identity. One of the things that stood out to me that Z really stood up for was butch bisexual people, because there's even discourse today that bisexual people cannot be butch. But Leslie Feinberg would disagree. As I've explained, nobody has the right to tell you who you can and cannot be, and you have the freedom to define yourself how you wish. Ultimately, what is perhaps the most important part of their politics is two concepts that I think are tied hand in hand, which is Marxism or communism and transgender liberation. Leslie Feinberg was the first activist to write about a Marxist transgender history, looking at gender in the ways that it has been used against poor people, people of color, and beyond. I really want you guys to remember Leslie Feinberg as a revolutionary communist who not only worked to advance the rights of transgender people, but worked very, very hard to advance the rights of everybody, with a huge emphasis on self-determination. Feinberg dedicated her entire life to activism, and one of the last causes that Z dedicated herself to was the freeing of Cece McDonald, a trans woman who was imprisoned for defending herself against a neo-Nazi attacker. Unfortunately, Leslie Feinberg experienced a multitude of health problems throughout her entire life, eventually succumbing to the tick-borne illness Lyme disease in 2014. In the 1970s, Leslie Feinberg was diagnosed with Lyme disease, but it was so under-researched that it was not until the last 6 years of her life that she was able to get any treatment for it. Feinberg attributed her health crisis to bigotry, to a lack of science, and to discrimination against her transgender identity, which made it very, very hard to seek out health care. Indeed, transgender people today still experience a lot of hurdles when it comes to getting health care, especially from doctors that are willing to work with bodies such as theirs. What I mainly want you guys to take away from this is that Leslie Feinberg was incredibly important to the queer community. And not only that, but as a lesbian, I am just so astounded and I am so excited to be able to read about Leslie Feinberg and to see pictures of her when she was younger and to just know that the lesbian community is a lot more diverse than the definition that is enforced today. A lot of trans exclusionary radical feminists who are also lesbians have this very gender essentialist idea of what being a lesbian is, to the point now that if you are somebody who is a lesbian and who is in a relationship with someone who was assigned male at birth and is non-binary, or who is a transgender man, many people think that that identity is not valid. The existence of Leslie Feinberg in all of her glory proves that that is not right. And not only that, Feinberg knew many, many lesbians that did not fit this gender essentialist definition of the word lesbian that we understand today. It is my hope that after watching this video, you guys want to read her work, Stone Butch Blues and Transgender Warriors. They are definitely worth the read. Stone Butch Blues is a very, very good book, and so is Transgender Warriors. In fact, books like Transgender Warriors inspired other books written more recently, such as Female Husbands by Jen Mannion, and that book is actually dedicated to Leslie Feinberg. So shout out to Jen Mannion, I guess, and shout out to Leslie Feinberg. Anyways, thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you guys learned a lot about Leslie Feinberg and a little bit about, kind of what queerness meant like 60 plus years ago. I had a lot of time talking to you guys, and yeah, thank you very much. Bye.